bienvenue à cette 4e édition de Ready for It. Bienvenue à toutes et tous. Applaudissez-vous pour être là. Au nom de toute l'équipe de DG Consultants, je voudrais bien évidemment vous remercier d'être venus, mais surtout vous remercier pour votre audace au quotidien tout le long de l'année. Vous avez l'audace de vouloir dompter le chaos qu'est devenu votre quotidien avec l'enchaînement des crises, la digitalisation à outrance des outils, la frénésie des métiers, la perte des talents et bien évidemment la recrudescence des attaques dans une surface de plus en plus élargie et donc fragilisée. Ça fait beaucoup, mais vous êtes audacieux et vous voulez rejoindre la communauté parce que vous croyez, comme nous, chez DG Consultants, que c'est en travaillant entre pairs, avec les partenaires, pour trouver les meilleures solutions. Techniques, certes, mais surtout humaines, parce que c'est avec l'intelligence collective que nous allons y arriver. Donc, je vous souhaite un très beau démarrage de cette 4e édition. Beaucoup d'audace, beaucoup de courage et beaucoup de bienveillance. Et surtout, maintenant, vous me permettez de passer en anglais, parce que nous démarrons avec une conférence assez différente. Changeons les codes. So, let me welcome on stage Tom Fishburne.
Merci beaucoup. Je suis très content d'être ici avec vous. C'est ma première visite à Monaco et je parlerai en anglais parce que mon français est trop basic. But it's very great to be with you today. I'm excited to talk about the funny side of digital and security transformation. This conference is ready for IT. What I want to talk about is one of the factors that can get in the way of us being ready for IT, and that's the human factor. That's the organizational factor. And if we want to talk about digital and security transformation, we really have to think about organizational transformation. So I'm going to start with a cartoon that I drew just about 3 years ago. We have a few executives around a table. Digital transformation is years away. I don't see our company having to change anytime soon. And then there's this big COVID-19 wrecking ball coming from the side. I drew this, I think, physically feeling what it would feel like to be hit by a wrecking ball. But it struck me as I got ready to come to this event that this hasn't been the only wrecking ball in our lives in the world of technology. There are wrecking balls all the time as we have to figure out how to make sense of all of the technology changes that are happening. Web3 and blockchain, everything along those lines. And then, of course, just in November, ChatGPT. How do we make sense of that in our organizations? And that's part of the challenge, ultimately. How do we make sense of the change that's happening? How do those of you in this room, when you go back to your organizations, help your organizations get through the change that's part of the new technologies that come along? And as you go through the rest of this conference over the next 2 days and learn about so many of the new things that are happening in the world of technology, what I want to talk about will hopefully help you as you go back to your organizations and have to really bring change into your companies. And so that you can avoid conversations that can feel a bit like this. Are you ready to meet about digital transformation? We can't see your slides. Do you need to download the video plugin? We're restricted to IE7. Okay, I tried to email the slide deck, but it bounced back. Our file limit is 1 megabyte. Dropbox, WeTransfer, blocked by our firewall. Google Docs, yeah, right. I'm not sure how to present to you. Can you fax it to us? I drew this a few years ago, and it already feels incredibly outdated, largely because of the COVID-19 wrecking ball. But now we have a different sort of environment. When can we get back to normal and start resisting technology and ignoring changing customer needs again? And so organizations are constantly struggling with how to keep up with the pace of change. A friend of mine named Scott Brinker described it this way: that technology changes exponentially, organizations change logarithmically. And so there's a friction in there. As the pace of change with technology happens, our organizations can sometimes struggle to keep up. And that can be driven by a lot of different factors. One of them might, I should say that can be a lot of different factors. And it creates what I like to think of as a bit of an awkward adolescence. If you think about organizations on a path to digital maturity, there's an adolescent period where the tools and the technologies are available, but our organizations haven't quite kept pace with the change of that technology. Our mindsets haven't kept pace with the change of that technology. And this awkward adolescence can show up in lots of different ways in our organizations. This is the team driving our digital transformation, just as soon as we can find people to hire with those specialized skills. Some of it's a hiring issue. A lot of it has to do with even getting on the same page about what digital transformation even means. Are we all aligned that our top priority is digital transformation? Of course, absolutely, 100%. So what exactly do we mean by digital transformation? Oh, sorry, I'm late for another meeting. And this can happen again and again and again. Since it's our top priority, what do we mean by digital transformation? Zoom meetings? Using Slack? Digital first, data-driven, customer-centric? Don't forget Agile. Something to do with the cloud? Making TikTok videos? Maybe we should start with what it doesn't mean. And so a lot of times the organizations that you're working with aren't even on the same page about what digital transformation even means. It makes your jobs a lot harder how to navigate that. Forrester had a piece of research a few years ago that found that 21% of people in organizations felt like their companies were already done with digital transformation, as if it's just a one-time event and then you're done. But of course, the change is ongoing and ever-present and continues. And we have to figure out how to ways that organizations can keep pace with the constant nature of change. And that plays out in the security world too. We detected an SSH protocol authentication bypass and a local privilege escalation. That's good, right? Our CISO is saying will be a headline news story tomorrow. So balancing out the communication across suddenly all the different functional groups in our organizations that also have to make sense and understand what's happening. I'll be ready for the cybersecurity meeting just as soon as I send my bank details to the son of a deposed dictator I've been trying to help. Ultimately, as I said, transformation and security and digital transformation has to do with organizational transformation, the human factor of who's in the way of these changes. Don't worry, cybersecurity is the very top of our list of pains in the butt. So figuring that out is a big part of the job, and what I want to talk about today is a little bit of the human factor and how a few different aspects of the mindset change that can hopefully make some of this change a little more palatable in your organizations. Because the awkward adolescence shows up in how organizations connect with consumers. I think my Nest smoke alarm is going off. Google AdWords just pitched me a fire extinguisher and an offer for temporary housing. And in the products that we make, here we have a toaster that makes toast after making you wait for a firmware update, makes toast by watching how you like toast, makes toast for $5.99 a month, makes toast and lets you know that Smucker's is on sale. And then the AI version, toast, I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave. And so the awkward adolescence shows up throughout. And again, it's the organizations trying to keep pace with the potential of the technology. Because the best technology in the world, if you have a mismatched mindset, won't lead to experiences that are ultimately what your customers want to buy. And of course, one of the biggest changes that we've seen with ChatGPT, AI turns this single bullet point into a long email I can pretend I wrote. AI makes a single bullet point out of this long email I can pretend I read. Our organizations have to figure out, and us as individuals have to figure out how to make sense and work with all of these technologies. And it's tricky, it's hard. And my big overarching thesis for today, if you take away anything, is that I think we need our sense of humor more than ever. We need to show up as humans in this type of environment to help us connect with all the humans in our organizations who will ultimately be impacted all the way through. Technology is no longer just an issue that relates to different groups inside of an organization. It impacts everybody. And so ultimately, how we navigate that will require a little bit more humanness, and our sense of humor can help us along the way. So a little bit about my background, because I have kind of an unusual background. I dreamed about being a cartoonist when I was a kid. Jean-Jacques Sempé was actually one of my favorite cartoonists, Petit Nicolas, and also a lot of the other cartoon work that he's done in France. I loved drawing cartoons. I gave it up, though. I didn't think that that could be a real job. I ended up working as a technology project manager in the late 90s, helping build websites for airlines and hotel chains. And then I found myself, strangely, picking it up again at a very unlikely place, Harvard Business School. I arrived as a student. I started drawing cartoons about student life. I fell in love with the way that cartoons could poke fun at lots of different issues that we were all going through together as students. And I fell in love with it. It became something that I did for the 2 years that I was there. And then ultimately, it followed along in my business career. Most of my career has been in marketing. At General Mills, Nestle, a smaller company called Method. I was interim chief marketing officer at a technology company called Hotel Tonight. And all along, I kept drawing cartoons every week as a bit of a diary of what I was going through as a marketer. And it gave me a way to explore some of the issues that we were all grappling with. I used to send out the cartoons in the middle of the workday, and a friend of mine noticed that when I would send out the cartoon, people's heads would sort of pop up and start talking about the cartoons. And I realized, in some ways, drawing cartoons making fun of the issues that we were struggling with was actually giving us permission to talk about them in a more open and honest way. And it created a little bit of a sense of belonging that we were all going through these issues together. So it became something that I really fell in love with. I kept it going throughout my marketing career. 12 years ago, I was able to leave my regular job and do this full time. And in October, I celebrated my 20th anniversary of drawing this weekly cartoon. And it's now read by a few 100,000 business people every week. A couple of years ago, I had the chance to meet these two women. These are professors at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. They are pioneering the first ever MBA level course on the power of humor as a leadership skill. And they asked me to be their cartoonist in residence. So I got to sit in on the class and learn about humor as an overlooked leadership skill, because oftentimes we don't feel comfortable bringing our sense of humor to work. And they had a piece of research that really struck with me. They called it the humor cliff. They found a huge data study that measured the percentage of people who remember laughing or smiling the day before. And then they tracked that over their life, and they found that it drops off this cliff right around the time we start going to work. And then it kind of follows around in our career and starts to tick back up a few years after retirement. And their big message to everyone is don't fall off the humor cliff. That in a way, if we can bring our sense of humor to work more, it can make us better leaders. It can put us in a place where we can communicate better with our teams. It can set a culture where those who work in our organizations feel comfortable being their true selves and talking about what's really going on. It creates an environment that's open to entrepreneurialism and creativity. All of these things are good things for our organizations. So we created a little cartoon before this event, and we sent it to all of you, asking to come up with caption ideas to solve this riddle, what's happening in this cartoon. So I want to share just some of the funny examples that came in from you ahead of this event. Pour le nom de notre projet phare, vous préférez move to cloud or go to cloud? Il n'est jamais trop tard pour s'améliorer. My dear colleagues, we need to be careful. We found traces of each of you everywhere. Confidentiality is key, guys. Remember this. There's no point in running. You have to start on time. We help you to improve your work with artificial intelligence, but do not worry, no need to rush to invest in the training. And then the final one, vous avez tout votre roue de Deming sur le dos? So a quick round of applause for everybody who submitted these. These were great. I love this type of exercise because it's fun to see how you have one situation and everybody sees something a little bit different. And ultimately, by finding our own sense of humor, it lets us take it in a lot of different directions. And I do some form of a caption contest often when I travel, and I find that there can be a split. People sometimes feel nervous doing that in their office. Sometimes people get really excited and they draw all over the cartoons and make it into something else. Other times, people ask if it could be anonymous or they don't reply at all. And a lot of times our organizations, I think, could be a bit of a filter on how comfortable we are showing up with our sense of humor. One of the barriers I find is that people are worried about, is humor appropriate for the workplace? So I want to share just a framework that I find useful, that when you think about your own appropriate sense of humor, there's not one size fits all. They're very different kinds. There's self-enhancing humor, where you laugh at yourself. There's affiliative humor, where you laugh with others. There's self-defeating humor, where you put yourself down. And then there's aggressive humor, where you put others down. And if you think about it, there's a bit of a spectrum on how much empathy is in the sense of humor. High empathy, low empathy. Are you focused on yourself or focused on others? And one big lesson I think is useful when you go into your organizations, if you aim for humor that has empathy attached to it, that'll mitigate many of the concerns that are there and ultimately can unlock a lot of creativity and potential in your teams. Okay, I want to walk through 5 different aspects of a mindset change that I think is important as we think about how best to bring technology into our organizations and help facilitate some of the digital and security transformation we talked about. First idea I want to share with you is the idea that the shiny new thing is not a strategy. And a lot of times organizations can treat it like a strategy. We need to stay focused on our marketing priorities and not get distracted by every shiny new, look, squirrel. I drew this from a marketing perspective because that's my background, but I think organizations in general can do this a lot, whatever it is. And there's a lot of technology changes that can fall into this category of the look squirrel out the window. We didn't have a strategy. We kept changing our minds, and we failed repeatedly. Let's just tell management we're being agile. Where should we focus this year? Blockchain. It will change everything. Everybody is talking about it. The potential applications are endless. We don't want to be left behind. What exactly is blockchain? Also, artificial intelligence. And it moves on again and again and again. There's a company a few years ago named the Long Island Iced Tea Beverage Company. They made bottled Long Island iced tea beverages. They were a publicly listed, traded company. One day they announced, the only announcement they made was that they were going to change their name from the Long Island Iced Tea Beverage Company to Long Island Blockchain. That one press release alone increased their stock price by 300%. Because people were like, oh wow, there's something here. No strategy attached to it. And so we have to have some kind of a filter on how best to make sense of news that's coming down the pike, on how we approach it. Have you figured out how AI will impact our business? Working on it. How will AI impact our business? There are many ways that AI can impact our business. And so ultimately, when every organization has access to the same tools, it's not just about adopting the latest tech. It's about how do you do it in a way that's consistent with your own strategy. And a strategy ultimately that can lead to some differentiation versus competitors, that it makes sense for your own organizations. Dharmesh Shah is the Chief Technology Officer at HubSpot, and he has this quote that I find really instructive about this particular period of time we're in. Netscape was to the internet what ChatGPT is to artificial intelligence. The internet existed before Netscape, but the browser helped millions of mere mortals connect the dots on what could be done and dream of what could be. And that's an incredibly exciting time to be, but when everyone in the organization is experimenting and learning about it, the potential is applying it in lots of different ways before your organization is quite ready. And so the challenge is to make sure that the cart doesn't lead the horse, but that there's a strategy attached to some of these. How did you get budget approval for all this? I just told them the name of the project. And there are a lot of projects being greenlit right now across the corporate world in general that may not have a strategy attached to them yet. I could have drawn this after coming to Monaco. This would have been very appropriate. I have to redraw it and put Monaco in the background. Okay, Second idea I want to share with you is the idea of being data-driven, but not data-blinded. One of the biggest changes our organizations have had is the access that everybody in the organization has to data to make informed decisions, to make better decisions in the organization. But one of the things we have to be careful with is that you can ultimately find a lot of data to back up decisions that are not necessarily good decisions. And a lot of data doesn't necessarily have value just on the merits of having it be present. There's all sorts of dashboards that we suddenly have a lot of access to, but sometimes they can read a little bit like this. Vanity metric that has nothing to do with sales, graph that doesn't match any other department's numbers, chart that hasn't been updated lately, a really pretty map. No idea what this is or what to do with it. And so figuring out how to be savvier with the data that we have at our disposal is important for everybody in the extended part of the organization. So you can find two trend lines: sales, shaved heads. We found this correlation in the data. Everyone take a razor. A lot of decisions can be made that don't quite make sense. Consumers will love how we use their data to deliver a personalized customer experience. Cool, show me. Not on my laptop. I turned off cookies. I only use VPN for my peace of mind. And this is really relating more and more to our customer data in a lot of ways. You know, there are different ways that organizations use that. The gym shoes you liked in our survey are on sale. Great. The gym shoes you browsed last year are on sale. Okay. I hear you have a new gym membership. Need any shoes? Wait, what? Maybe you wouldn't have skipped your workout today if you had new shoes. So part of the digital maturity and part of moving out of that awkward adolescence is getting savvier with what data that we have at our disposal and how we best use that data to make better decision-making and create better experiences for our customers. Some of my favorite examples I've been studying are companies that have decided in many cases not to use the data that they have. Bloom & Wild is a British florist. They have a long tradition of using customer data to decide how to move their business forward. They study things about when people buy their flowers. It helped them decide, for instance, that there was a big occasion around Grandparents' Day that they needed to jump on as a brand and as a business. But their biggest breakthrough was when they realized that there were certain times that people didn't want to receive marketing, particularly around Mother's Day. They were the first brand globally to tie their customer data to occasions to make it simple for a one-click opt-out for communication around Mother's Day. It must be really horrible not to have a mom and be bombarded by excessive Mother's Day marketing. This wasn't easy to do in a tech way, but they found a way to do it because it was important for what they stood as a brand. And I like that as we move on this maturity curve, how we think of how better to make sense of the data that we have at our disposal. And it's been interesting the last few years, and just the last 4 years since they launched this, most other brands have started to come up with a version of this. And I feel like that's a long part of the trajectory that we're on, is moving to a place where we make better use of the data that we have. Okay, third idea I want to share with you is the idea that playing it safe can be risky. And some of the initial impulse with technology, as much as there is a shiny new thing, let's do it all right now, there's also sometimes a resistance, let's just say no to anything that's new. We realized our single biggest security vulnerability was our customers, so we got rid of them. The identity verification process is finally complete. Thank you for your patience. So finding a way to navigate how we ultimately work as a business and balance those extremes. How do we balance risk appropriately across the organization? And everybody's going to have a different point of view on what their risk threshold is within the organization. And that means we have to have better conversations about how to navigate that. Another Monaco-related cartoon. We always competed this way. Why change? Sometimes it takes things like the COVID wrecking ball to push things forward, because the path of least resistance is to keep doing the same thing that we've always done. And that's a big opportunity for organizations that can think a little bit differently. We need to do something so innovative that no brand has ever done anything like it. Seems risky. Can you give examples of other brands that have done this? The path of least resistance is to follow what others have done. And that's not how you create meaningful uniqueness as a business, competitive advantage as a business. There's a reason why a lot of innovation ends up looking like this. One more blade, on and on, maybe an MP3 player. I think I'll just keep the beard. So if we want to create innovation that actually creates a real impact, it involves working within the risk thresholds. It involves on how we navigate with the rest of the organization. This was our compromise with legal. Like I said, everybody has a different risk threshold. And that's a good thing, because those who are attuned to risk are looking out for things that can get in the way. But ultimately, there's a push and pull on how organizations navigate those different extremes. You have the classic, is this glass half full or half empty? And again, I drew this from a marketing perspective. Marketers always think it's totally full. The glass is full, let's throw a launch party. The glass is half full. It has many of the features we wanted. The glass is half empty. There's a lot of risk in the model. The glass is empty. Someone could drown or get cut on the glass. And so in our organizations as leaders, we have to navigate those conversations and find a way to make it through in a way that can actually retain a lot of what makes ideas unique. Kind of organizations by default can feel a little bit like this. Chief Status Quo Officer, VP of Wait and See, VP of Play It Safe, VP of More Analysis, Director of It'll Never Work, Director of Tried It Before, Director of Yes, But, Manager of I Give Up. That's a challenging place to be, ultimately, when you're trying to create change. And so, again, the culture of an organization, how an organization is receptive to ideas, how we have those conversations really matters, particularly when there's so much change happening, and our competitors also have the opportunity to move quickly. I want to share a quick example, one of my favorite examples of one person able to drive a pretty monumental change. This is a doctor who also can code. So it's kind of a unique skill set. The third aspect of his background is that when he was a child, he had a series of illnesses that were very hard to diagnose. And so he spent a lot of time as a child going to the hospital. He ultimately was saved by the fact that his mother kept such great notes as they went from this specialist to that specialist to that specialist. She collected all these binders of information. It eventually enabled the doctors to figure out what was going on, and they were able to cure him, but not without some serious long-term issues, including hearing loss. So he was shaped by these factors, and he decided, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a doctor that believes in the power of IT. I want to create change in the health system to make it easier for patients going through a situation like this to have access to their personal health data. So he went down this path, became a doctor, joined a hospital group. He started thinking, I want to find a way to put this information in patients' hands. The way he describes it, he'd spent a whole year researching for hospital IT directors on how to make records available to patients, and then another year begging them to do so. And I feel like this is a challenge in some ways a lot of organizations could face against. New ideas come along. It's always easier to say no, particularly when there's something sensitive like patient health data. So he was motivated by an internal drive, decided not to let the fact that he kept hearing no slow him down. And he went for it and developed a small, simple prototype. He ended up leaving his medical practice, starting a small organization called Patients Know Best to make it easier to manage your own health. And then he decided he's bumping up against the hospital to make it happen. So instead, he's going to actually go to end consumers and find ways to find little opportunities for people to play with his prototype, play with his demo, play with his beta, and see where there's an opportunity to grow. And eventually it started to gain some traction and started to grow. The analogy, which I find really useful, and I think this can apply to any form of technology change. He said at first he was trying to come in through the gates. This is an idea. We have to be doing this. How do we make this technology change in our organization? And then he realized that it was the wrong metaphor. He was trying to come in through this Trojan horse. And he said the better analogy, ultimately, when there were changes that were so hard to get a yes to, was to think about it instead as Trojan mice. How do you make ideas that you're trying to make happen into small versions that can slip under the door and take root and get adoption in unexpected ways? And I thought that the Trojan mice was such a great metaphor for how we can make change happen in our organizations by making it, rather than top-down, more bottoms-up. And so he experimented with all sorts of Trojan mice. Sometimes he'd find a particular group where this would be particularly valuable and get 1 or 2 doctors to do it on the side. And ultimately, there were patients sort of using the apps themselves, collecting it. It was more of a digital version of what his mother did, but made it easier to retain the records. Ultimately, he gave the app away free to teaching hospitals, and that created more of a bottoms-up approach. And the net effect was, when 2020 happened, and the COVID-19 wrecking ball came along, and suddenly the National Health Service in the UK was open to some type of digital transformation, his app was chosen as the first third-party app to integrate with the NHS. And it became a dramatic proof point on what could be made possible. But it didn't happen by trying to come in through the door. It came up by creating bottoms-up, iterative prototypes, simple experiments that can grow. And I think that's a really good analogy for how we can create change in our organizations. Okay, fourth idea I want to share with you is the idea that humor can help break down silos. A lot of what I was talking about are thinking in silos. And organizations, if we're not careful, can feel a little bit like this. Our silo mentality may be getting out of hand, and there's a moat and a castle environment. So how we as leaders can navigate some of those silos to make changes happen really matter. A lot of times, digital transformation is treated in this way. Your job is digital transformation. It's not just about disruptive technology. We need a whole new way of thinking across the entire organization. This is one of our top priorities. We're all counting on you. So good luck on this summer internship. So if we're not careful, we can end up creating initiatives that end up just staying small because we don't end up involving the rest of the organization. I thought if we worked together, our cycle times were supposed to improve, dev and ops. And this ultimately plays out not only internally, but how our customers engage and interact with our businesses. I placed an order on your website and it still hasn't shipped. Well, it could be a problem with our web team, or our technical team, or our fulfillment team, or our inventory team, or our payment team, but I can't access their system, so there's no way to tell. Aren't you all part of the same team? No, I'm only in charge of excellent customer service. And the siloed approach, if we're aware of it internally, it's particularly aware to our customers who think it's just one brand that they're interacting with. So how we navigate this and make the changes across our organization really matters. How can we be more customer-centric? I'd like to help, but that's not my department. Mine neither. Good luck. This is the chief marketing officer for Deloitte a few years ago, and he came into an organization that felt very siloed. He was trying to create some change. He wanted to find out how the customers of Deloitte thought about Deloitte. And he started to think about what some of the problems were and how he could address it with a little bit of humor. They did a little bit of research, and they kept hearing back this comment: so much bullshit. I wish they'd just talk straight to us. And then he asked around inside the organization, how can we potentially make a change? And someone suggested the idea, how about we develop a spell checker, but only for detecting corporate BS? And so they played around with this idea, and they actually built it. This is an early software thing you can see from the UI that is a couple of years ago. But they created a simple system where you could upload any document, a presentation, or a written document, and it would give you a BS index score to show how much corporate BS you're using and trying to communicate. They ended up being so successful inside Deloitte, they ended up offering it as a fun thing to their own customers as packaged software. They called it Bullfighter, and they sent out packages to all of their customers to help them with their own communication, how they talk within their organization across silos. It came with stickers you could put on documents, whether your document smelled like roses or whether it didn't. But in my mind, I think this is a really fun example of how a leader can use humor to draw attention that a problem that an organization has. And by using humor to draw attention to it, it can actually make change happen. People aren't as resistant to it in the same way that if you went to their face and said, we have a problem in how we communicate. And so that's, I think, a leadership opportunity available to all of us. How do we use humor to communicate, to get our teams thinking about the issues that are slowing us down, that are getting in the way of making change happen, that can ultimately find a way to get the conversation on the table. Careful, the last content was full of marketing. Okay, the final idea I want to share with you is the idea that humor can also help drive change. Ultimately, we have to put things on the table if we want to work on them and make serious change happen. Wait, I thought change just meant moving faster. When it involves complete wholesale change, when it is a transformation, ultimately what we aren't talking about is sometimes more important than what we are talking about, because it could get in the way of us actually addressing the core issues. Instead of risking anything new, let's play it safe by continuing our slow decline into obsolescence. So I had the chance a few years ago to work with an organization out of Singapore, DBS Bank. They were trying to go through a digital transformation. They were the largest bank in the region, but they were trying to act more like a startup. They were trying to adopt some of the changes that their customers were expecting. But there was a lot of baggage in the marketplace, a lot of baggage of how they've operated in the past. One of their nicknames for DBS Bank was "damn bloody slow." Not a place to be if you want to sort of come across as a younger startup. And we found that the organization realized that a lot of what was holding them back was not the technology. They had access to the best technology, but it was their own organization sort of making it happen. And so they ended up doing a culture change effort, and I had the opportunity to sit in the organization, to interview people that worked at DBS Bank, to talk to them about the culture. And I found one word kept showing up in these conversations: scolded. I'd hear somebody say, "I'm worried if I make a mistake, I'm going to be scolded by my manager. I'm worried if this product fails, I'm going to be scolded." And I was like, this is such an interesting word. It's such a relevant word for the industry. It kind of gives an insight into what the organization is like. So I had a conversation with them, and I asked them, in Singapore, what do you think of when you think of the word scolded? And I was on the phone, so I couldn't see them. But somebody started talking about when he was a child and he was in school and he made a mistake, and then everybody just started laughing. And I couldn't figure out what was going on until somebody sent me this picture. And he'd gotten up and stood in the corner of the room. And I guess it's fairly common in Singapore, if you're a child that makes a mistake, they make you stand in the corner like this. And they were all starting to laugh about it. And ultimately, that led to a cartoon that I could draw from. Does anyone else have a hypothesis they'd like to test? But the magic, I think, happened a bit on that call where a very senior person in the organization was willing to kind of use some self-deprecating humor to make fun of himself, to draw attention to the issue. And it became something that they could use symbolically in the organization to say, we don't want to operate like this. We don't want to feel like this here. And I feel like in our organizations, we have to give permission. We have to give permission for people to feel like they can talk about what's really going on. When we don't, it's still happening, but it's ultimately getting in the way of making the most out of our technology. I'm curious, how many of you know what this photo is? If you bought the very first Apple Macintosh back in 1984 and you took the hood off of the Mac, you'd find the signatures of every single person on the extended team who helped bring that Mac to life. It has everybody. Steve Jobs' name is there, but everybody on the extended organization. They all signed it before they shipped a single unit. And I think this is a great metaphor for how organizations work when they're working at their best, where everyone, no matter what their functional area, feels like they're part of bringing things to life in an organization. And ultimately, to do that, they have to feel like they can bring their true selves to work. This is an executive in the front named Hiroki Asai, longtime executive at Apple. And he challenged himself at every all-hands meeting in the team to try to make as many people laugh as possible. He had sort of a guideline that when he had an all-hands meeting, there was one part of the agenda that was all about bringing laughter to the organization, because then people would feel comfortable bringing the real issues on the table that are getting in the way to sort of make things happen. And he has this lovely quote that I want to close with and share with you. Fear kills creativity, and humor is our most powerful tool to drive fear out of the system. And so I hope as you leave here and go through the next 2 days and focus on all the exciting things that are happening in technology in your industry, think about how the other part of that, how to bring them to life in your organizations, and hopefully how a sense of humor can help you do that. It's really been delightful to be here. I'm going to be upstairs around 2 o'clock with some books of cartoons. If any of you are around, I'd love to meet some of you, and it's lovely to be a part of this event. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Tom. Merci beaucoup. Merci. Donc, il est l'heure d'aller déjeuner. Et rendez-vous donc à 14h, comme Tolan l'a dit, pour sa dédicace de livre, mais aussi et surtout les one-to-one, les ateliers. Bref, on démarre en force. Bon appétit!